The topic tonight is managing our anxiety and fears. What are you so afraid of? We are privileged and honored to have with us tonight. We are connecting New York, London, and Israel. And it is our honor and our pleasure to have with us Rabbi Manis Friedman, leading spiritual thinker and social philosopher, a frequent guest at the virtual events of Center for Jewish Life for a number of years. And this is Real Talk, a real conversation with members of the Center for Jewish Life Young Advisory. We have with us Lea Queroub, who recently made Aliyah from France and London, who is Solution Business Manager at SimilarWeb, and also Julien Lederman, originally from New York, spent many years in London, and now also made Aliyah, head of M&A and Strategy at Nano Dimension. So again, good evening to our friends and viewers from around the world. This is Real Talk, Real Conversation, and we hope you enjoy yourself this evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And I hand you over to Rabbi Manis Friedman, who will begin the conversation this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Anxiety is a terrible thing because it makes people really anxious. If you had to pinpoint the ultimate bottom line cause, why do we have so much anxiety? Why are we so anxious? What would be your first guess?
I'm happy to go. I think it's the fear of the past and of the future. That's how I would best describe it. And it can be either or, either worrying about what's going to happen or rethinking, rehashing what has happened and what could have happened instead. That's how I would define it.
Yeah, to add to that, I think it's definitely, as Lea said, a good framing of the past and the future. I would also add a kind of a layer of what's in your control and what's not in your control. I probably, and I want to speak for everyone in the world, but I probably worry more about the things that are out of my control than in my control, because if they're in my control, I feel I can steer them in a certain direction in my favor. But if they're not, they're obviously beyond my own power, and that lack of control creates unease because it could affect the outcome that I want or don't want.
So would you say there's a difference between fear and anxiety?
Go ahead, Lea.
Yeah, I would say so. I think there's something more, almost more internal, more intimate about anxiety. And there's something, I can see a cause, like I think the cause for fear is something that you can identify maybe more easily than the cause of anxiety, which sounds like more nebulous concept to me.
Yeah, I think to me, I think definitely there's a difference. I think fear is very much part of our natural instincts and how humans have become humans. If you're in war, I think it's very natural to be fearful of death, whereas anxiety is how your mind adds more thoughts and complexity to any situation, whether it's war or not in war, and can create something out of nothing. Whereas fear, I think, in its most basic sense and how humans react is actually very natural. And I would add, very healthy. It's what often keeps us alive. It's what steers us away from a dangerous situation. Whereas anxiety is not that, it doesn't have that same sense of being natural or even being healthy and constructive for one's own life in the way that fear is. Fear has kept me away from cliffs that would have been dangerous, that would be dangerous to me, that are dangerous to me. Whereas anxiety has kept me up at night when I'm safe in bed, and there's actually nothing to be fearful of.
So you haven't gone bungee jumping.
I have done skydiving, but I haven't done bungee jumping.
Ooh,
Yeah.
you've overcome a lot of fear.
Yeah.
Right, impressive. So one final question. If fear is externally caused from an external source, whereas anxiety is just a description of you. Now, you're afraid of something, but your anxiety is just you. I'm an anxious person. So if we were to look for a solution to anxiety, where would we begin? A change of lifestyle isn't going to do it. Wherever you go, you take your anxiety with you. So where do we begin to look for a solution to anxiety?
I just speak from personal experience. I mean, I think you have to look to yourself. I mean, that's where I've looked. 3 years ago, I got very involved in meditation, and I think one of the things that I learned there from one of my teachers was that you are not necessarily your thoughts. Yes, they are a part of you, but they do not define you. So I think creating that separation where you're still part of yourself, but not everything about that goes on in yourself, I think has been a very interesting learning process for me in dealing with anxiety and fear.
Yeah, I think the obvious answer, is within yourself. I do believe that there is a notion of the impact of the environment on yourself as well, and especially after this year of COVID, there's been a lot of work on your self-esteem, work on yourself, and it's very, very, very self-centered, and I think we all are, and it's amazing to invest in yourself so you can give more and all of those things. But I'm wondering, if you wish, what is the right balance between finding the answer within yourself, but also keeping in mind more of an outwards thinking perspective. So there's probably a bit of both. It's within yourself, but there is something about the environment too, I would say.
By environment, you mean life.
Life.
Reality.
Relationships. I think I like what you said about at the beginning around you can change everything in your life. If you are not comfortable with yourself, you won't be comfortable with yourself. I tend to agree with that, but I think the impact of the people we decide to surround ourselves with, the activities we decide to dedicate time to, all of this also I think can change profoundly how we feel on a daily basis. And I think that's not to be underestimated.
I know people who are impressively fearless, but they're so anxious. They're riddled with anxiety. So another definition. What is there a difference, or is there a relationship between anxiety and uncertainty?
Yeah, I would personally say that there is a very direct relationship. I don't know if it's exactly one for one and they're identical siblings or two sides of the same coin, but they're definitely very, very, very close, frighteningly so. And I think it's uncertainty. I think it ties to how Lea started it off. To some degree, it's about the past and the future. Not sure about the outcome of things, out of our control. So for me, they are implicitly related.
Yeah, I think there's also something around the multiplication of options. The more options you have, the more options, possibilities. The larger the scope of possibilities is, the potentially the more anxiety it can also generate. Yeah, I think there's definitely a link.
What somebody called the tyranny of choice. Yeah, more choices, more confusion, more uncertainty, more anxiety. So the solution is stop listening to the news, don't read newspapers, limit your horizons, don't know too much, and you'll be okay. You know, like in the olden days. In the olden days, people had real fears, but very little anxiety, because they knew exactly what's going to be. If your father is a farmer, you're going to be a farmer. And when you're a farmer, this is what you do. No anxiety. But if the rain doesn't come in time, or the bugs come and eat your crops, that's a fear. Something you can fight against to some degree. So let's think this again. If anxiety is closely related, at least closely related to uncertainty, what's the solution?
So it's creating a sense of certainty, but I feel more than that, it's probably a sense of safety rather than a sense of certainty, I would say. I think I was about to use the word safe space, which honestly has a different meaning to me since the last couple of days that we've been running in the stairs and going to the safe room. But I think there's an element of being in a safe space, and regardless of the level of uncertainty that you have, bringing it back to I don't know if it's a sense of control, as Julien was saying at the beginning, but bringing it back to things that are comprehensible, understandable, I think is a coping mechanism. I don't know if it's the total solution to anxiety, but it's definitely a coping mechanism at least.
The more certainties, right? The more certainties we have, the less uncertainty. But what can we be certain of?
The reality is very little, absolutely very little, if anything at all. So I think you need to be thankful for what happens, and that's a big part of it. I think it's, I wouldn't want to try and simplify things in an effort to control them more, or at least feel in control. I think it's just becoming comfortable with not entirely being in control. And I think having faith, and that word may mean a few different, some different things to different people in different ways, but just believing that, that it's okay not to control everything and to have that uncertainty, and that it's part of life. And actually very much acknowledging, I think one of the ways that I've come to appreciate that the most is realizing there's actually many things which I have no control over, and things generally work out fine. And I think the more I remind myself of that, and sometimes I do forget that, but the more I do remind myself of that, you realize that me controlling something usually has very little dictation on the outcome. And there's actually something I think beautiful and actually hopeful about that. So when I'm most concerned and overwhelmed with anxiety, it's because I forget that. And when I'm at the most ease with anxiety and uncertainty, it's because I remember that.
I remember seeing, one of these thought message signs in an office. This sign said, "If you can be calm under the circumstances, you don't understand the circumstances."
Yep.
It's almost like we're designed to not know. We are designed to not be certain, as if that's good or necessary. So yes, I agree. The more comfortable we get with the simple fact that we don't know, we can't be certain of anything, and that's not our place or our role. In other words, I don't have to be certain of anything in order to live a productive life. And we live a productive life almost miraculously because we don't know what we're doing. We don't know where we're coming from. We don't know where we're going. And yet, if we do things right, we have a meaningful life. So there's this little prayer that we say in the morning, which, I'm so used to it that I never really paid attention. But when I look at it closely, it is so brilliant. It's a little prayer we say early in the morning before we actually start the body of the prayer, of the morning prayer. And it basically says, "God, please protect me from slander, false witnesses, false accusations, strange occurrences," a whole list of things. But basically, it is the list of those things that we cannot protect ourselves from. How do you protect yourself from slander? What do you do? Somebody decides to say bad things about you. What are you going to do? You can't protect yourself. Strange occurrences. What do you want to do? Build a wall to protect you? So it is so healthy to wake up every morning and say, okay, these are the things I have no control over. So hey, it's up to you, God. I'm not going to worry about it because there's nothing I can do about it. That's just the nature of the world. So it turns out, to make it very simple, anxiety is produced partially by the false impression that if I knew, then I would be safe. If I was aware, if I could predict what's going to happen, then I would be secure. No, I wouldn't. Security doesn't come from knowing. Security comes from humility, from being comfortable with the fact that I don't know, I don't have to know, because I'm not running the world. Humble people are not anxious. It's an amazing but true thing. Truly humble people are not anxious because they never fell for this false impression that if I could control everything and if I would know everything, then I would be safe. No? No matter how much you know, you're not safe. You're never going to be safe on your own. It's just the nature of being created. Unless you are the creator, you can never be secure. True? So the strongest person is the most humble person. And humble doesn't mean I think I'm stupid. That's not humility. That's being stupid. Humility means it's not really about me. I'm as smart as they say I am. And I'm as capable as I am. And I'm better than most people at certain things. But it's not about me. If it's not about me, I don't need to be in control. I turn control over to God. And I say, God, you control the world. Let me live a meaningful life.
Rabbi, could just challenge, not challenge, but just to add something here, and I think maybe Lea will agree. I think the last few weeks here have been particularly challenging, because I think maybe people have been watching the news, what's happened here in Israel, but also around the world. And I would say, a lot of people have asked me, how are you? How are you doing? It's the first time going through this as a Oleh Chadash. And I said, the reality is like 10% of my fear and anxiety is from the rockets, because I've seen the Iron Dome. I sleep in a shelter, which is conveniently my bedroom, actually, to my apartment. And I trust in the protection systems that exist here. So only 10% of that fear and anxiety is from that. The other 90%, by and large, not entirely, but mostly, is from what I'm seeing online, particularly what's happening in the UK, in the US, and in different parts of the world. Whether it's happening in like the real world in a city, certain people marching, or whether it's just happening in the virtual world in social media, it feels like I actually need to say that prayer that you do in the morning, because it feels like everything that prayer is protecting against is happening. But furthermore, and I would like to consider myself a person with humility, probably not as humble as I'd like to be, but also I'd like to consider myself a person who cares about social welfare and society at large. And it's challenging to disconnect myself from the world and what we see being said about Israel, Jews, very huge statements about Jews and us as people. So how do we be humble, separate ourselves, but also in fact still stay connected to us and our community without being overwhelmed by the anxiety, at least that I've been feeling, and I imagine Lea has been as well.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I would totally agree with sort of the first part of what you said, which is, I don't know if luckily or not, because obviously in the south of Israel, people have had a very different experience to the one that we had from Tel Aviv and above, at least for the very recent conflict. But I would tend to agree. I don't think it created a massive fear or even anxiety. I think, there was surprise. There was obviously an unusual situation. You don't get rockets being thrown at Paris or London very often. But no, I agree, no specific fear or anxiety. From my part, I'm not as connected, I would say, to what you can read online. I think, not going to the extreme of cutting myself from the news and, living as if the outside world wasn't existing. I've learned to be very choosy about the amount of news that I read and, sort of the opinions, because I think a lot of things that we do read are not necessarily news, but more like opinions and editorials. And so I'm like, I love to get, lots of contradictory opinions, but after some point I do shut it down. So that's not really the main issue for me. I was very, and I don't know if it's anxious, but at least saddened by the situation in the streets of Israel. That is something that has broken the heart, I think, of pretty much everybody, to be honest, who lives in Israel. And I think, for at least one night, I couldn't see and keep the hope of a peaceful environment, of respect, of just this human decency, I think, also. So yeah, I think it generated more, sadness than anxiety at the end of the day.
Whether it's a fear or an anxiety, either way, it's very upsetting.
It is, even though it's interesting because I feel there is a negative connotation to the word anxiety to some level, as if a fear was legitimate and an anxiety not. And when people are anxious, you're trying to help them not being as anxious. And when you're anxious, you're trying to prevent yourself from being anxious. There's something very negative associated with anxiety.
Oh, they're both valid, and they can both be healthy because they're based on reality. We are vulnerable beings. There's no use denying it. The danger is that we look to the wrong places for our security. We rely on false gods. You see, idolatry is the biggest of sins because you're putting your trust in something that is not trustworthy. And that's going to really be damaging and in the long term, very destructive. So idolatry means putting your trust in that which cannot really help you and hoping to relieve your sense of insignificance by connecting yourself to something bigger and stronger, which is neither bigger nor stronger. So you put your trust and your identity, your security in a false god. It's really, really dangerous. You end up defending your God rather than having your God defend you. So you end up fighting a war to prove that your God is more reliable. It's really psychologically horrible and morally destructive, which leads us to another subject. What's the moral issue? What is the moral challenge? We're so busy with politics, with safety, because of COVID, we're so concerned with health. Did we kind of overlook the morality issues? The riots in the streets, the violence, the burning, the destruction. Everybody talks about it from a legal perspective, from a social perspective. Hardly anyone says anything about morality. So the other day I was watching this clip of teenagers, young people, rioting in the streets. And for the first time, it occurred to me, this is somebody's children. I'd love to speak to those parents and offer condolences. I would love to say to them, who did this to your children? Why are they out there destroying? Who did this to them? What happened? Why are they predatory animals? Where's the goodness? Where's the humanity? Where is it? I'm afraid I know the answer. If you ask any one of those people on the streets, what are the 10 Commandments? They don't know. They have no clue. They don't even know the movie. So what do you expect? We've created a huge hole, a gap in the morality education. So you really almost can't blame them. They're trying to live a life with no concept of morality or purpose or mission. When you leave that kind of empty space, it becomes occupied by wild animals, wild ideas. And I would love to see, and I'd love to see like a very famous, popular celebrity from the sports world or from Hollywood get up on a box in the streets where these people are rioting and just say, "Can I talk to you for a minute? What's wrong with you? What do you really want? Is this it? This is the best you have to offer? Why don't you use your energy to build society? You were born to correct the world, not destroy it." I don't think a single rioter would remain unimpressed and uninspired. If someone could just talk to them and they would listen and say something moral, it would change them overnight. We've missed this challenge. Make the world a more moral place. Stop worrying about health and about politics and about borders and about wealth. You can't control those things. The one thing we can control best is our morality, and we're neglecting it terribly, terribly. So I have, on the one hand, great hope. One little speech from a celebrity can change the streets. You just got to find the celebrity who has something to say.
Maybe the celebrities are afraid.
Somebody should educate a celebrity. Yeah.
You know, Rabbi Friedman, if I can come in, a quick question. You're talking about young people. You're talking about a lot of angry young people. Can you talk about the relationship, perhaps, between anger and fear? Is there a relationship between the two? They're angry because they're afraid. And number two, what is the solution? What is the message that can overcome that fear, that anger, and channel that energy in a productive way?
Well, when you get down to really absolute fundamentals, the frustrations that they're demonstrating begins with the frustration of being born. Why was I born? If you can't answer that question, you have no foundation for life. You live because you're alive. That is so empty. That is so sterile, meaningless. I live because I'm alive, and I have to stay alive because otherwise I'll die. That's a very profound philosophy there. Stay alive. Make a life for yourself because otherwise you'll die. It's meaningless. It's empty. Live your life so that you don't die. It's not working. Young people today are not impressed with life. And for very good reason. They don't see why it's necessary. They don't see where it's going. They don't see what it's going to produce. So any frustration, any disappointment, any pain, who needs it? Who needs it?
So I have a question for you here, because obviously having a sense of purpose is having a sense of direction, and therefore you could say an antidote to anxiety. But the reverse sort of thought would be to say, well, holding yourself accountable for higher standards of morality, for pursuing a purpose that you have set for yourself, that is something you want to aspire to, that can also generate its own dose of anxiety.
Yeah, because it's your idea. You can't solve the anxiety and uncertainty by what you have. because nothing you have is certain. So you come up with a plan, with an idea, with a goal, with a value system, but then who says your value system is valid? So anything we produce on our own is not going to take away that feeling of pettiness. I mean, even people, the Jews in Israel, who are uncertain of their right to be in the country. Zionism is a great idea, a great noble cause, and it inspired many young people to be better and higher and bigger than themselves. Chalutzim, pioneers. It was exciting, it was wonderful. But doubt crept in. The insecurity of not knowing for sure that this land is our land. That's debilitating. It's dangerous. So where do we get real direction, purpose that is solid? Only if we were created that way. If we were created to a purpose, not one of our own making. See, again, that's idolatry. If I come up with my own values and then worship them, that's called idolatry. But if, in fact, I exist for a purpose, not one that I made up, and for that purpose, I have to sacrifice everything because it is real, then I have solid foundation for whatever else I'm going to be doing. So here's young people, I'm talking children, 10-year-olds are saying, I didn't ask to be born. Why am I here? I have to honor my parents? For what? For giving birth to me? Well, thank you very much. Why? Why was I born? So unless everything goes my way, and then I'll accept life, okay, that's fine. But if it doesn't go my way, well, who did this to me? I think that's where the anger comes from. You gave me an existence, but you cannot tell me why and what for? That's enough to get you angry. You give birth to me without my consent and then tell me that I'm responsible for everything in life? How does that work?
Rabbi, quick question for you. I think that there are some tangible ways in which the younger generation is doubting things, and I think it's yes, there's no doubt there's less people who are believing in religion or some type of higher order of things. But and I'm speaking from a U.S. perspective, not an Israeli perspective here. I don't know the statistics, but from the U.S., this country that has championed amazing growth and success in many ways, our generation, or maybe a few years younger than me, but is the first generation that is making less money than their parents. We also, just in the last 15 years, with the rise of social media and some of the barriers it actually creates between people, are finding ourselves not in relationships until considerably later in life. And I don't want to say that those two things are the drivers of all fear and anxiety. I would never want to suggest that. But if you feel that you're not going to have as much as your parents had, and if you're not going to share your life with someone at least at the same point as when others before you did, what would you say to those people to alleviate those two things, which can, in my view, understandably drive a considerable amount of anxiety and fear, because those two things represent so many other things as well.
How did we get there? How did we get there? How is it that we're not in a relationship? The media, Hollywood, whoever you want to blame, made glamour an issue, an important issue in life. And being married is not glamorous. Being a wife is not glamorous. Being a husband is not glamorous. And so we're discouraged from marrying. We're encouraged to have glamorous relationships, which are shallow, temporary, always hurtful, destructive, diminishing the people. But we pursue glamour. We've been bitten by that bug. We have to undo that. We have to understand glamour for what it is, and we have to understand intimacy for what it is, and the need to share life with someone, not just share things. That's an important part of our world today. You're right. And in terms of not making as much money, some people are making much more money than their parents because they didn't go to college. I think we have limited ourselves by our college education. We're not as creative, we're not thinking out of the box, we're not original, we're not pioneering. We're too trained by college thinking. Got to break out of the box. Whatever college education can give you is fine, but it's not nearly enough. You got to think for yourself. You got to be original. You got to try things that are maybe not so safe and predictable, like our ancestors did. So I think these things are solvable. But behind it all, we have to answer the first question. Why was I born? Why should I be successful? Why do I need to make a life? So even people who know how to make a life, they just don't bother. Because so what? There's got to be something very compelling about life, because life takes effort. And without a compelling reason, we're not going to make the effort. We're spoiled.
How much?
So, go ahead.
I was about to ask, how much do you think? So it's sort of two questions, but leading to the same point. One question that I have in the back of my head is, how much anxiety is inherent to someone? You know, we have this way of saying, oh yeah, this person is very anxious by nature. So I'm thinking, how much is this something that is within you, and that might vary across people, versus something that's you sort of like nurture and that comes from other factors. And the reason this is sort of like a question that's at the back of my head is, from a lot of what you're saying, it feels like the sense of purpose, the sense of you know, sort of being here for a reason comes a lot from being very basic, the love of your parents, the cultural heritage that you have, and all of the things that you're being sort of like transmitted. So that leads me to thinking, well, maybe one part of the equation is, you know, going back to the example of the teenagers that you saw as well, how much can you equip someone to face life without that anxiety, and how much is that something that you can't really control?
Well, you can think of it in psychological terms. Why are some people more anxious than others? insecurity in growing up, a family that wasn't stable, and so on. So it increases your anxiety. But anxiety is a native-born condition. You are born anxious because you're born helpless. You're born dependent. So it is the human condition to be insecure. You know that famous statement from, was it Karl Marx? Religion is the opiate of the masses. The reason we have religion is because we're insecure. And the insecurity forces us to assume that there is a God who's in control and he's your friend because you're so insecure.
What do you think of that statement?
Well, the obvious question is to Karl Marx, you know your friend Stalin? He was in control. And he was the most insecure guy in town. He was paranoid. He was afraid of his own shadow. So not believing in God doesn't make you any less insecure. It just makes you a monster because you want to create your own security by killing anyone who threatens you or anything that threatens you. So he's right. He's absolutely right. Religion is the opiate of the masses. But nobody is excluded from that, from the masses. It is a human condition that we need to know what's real and true because we have a sense that we are temporary and fleeting. So what's really real? It's a legitimate insecurity. And if you don't admit to it, you're just kidding yourself. And that's part of our humility. That's part of our humanity. The recognition that I didn't create this world. It's not my world. Even my life is not for me or about me. It must serve some purpose, but by itself it is not justified. Just being is not justified. Now, why is that? A woman said to me many years ago, I was just out of yeshiva, very naive. She said, I'm going to kill myself. It's all meaningless. It's terribly meaningless. Nothing has any meaning. I'm going to kill myself. She had a whole plan of how she's going to do it. And I naively said to her, really? It's all meaningless? She says, yes. I said, nothing has any meaning. She says, no. I said, then why do you need to kill yourself? Sit. You'll die eventually. What's the difference? It's all meaningless. Luckily, she didn't kill herself. Why? If you think life is really meaningless, why don't you just relax? No worries, no worries. It's all meaningless. No. If you feel like life is meaningless, you become desperate. Why? Because we were created for a purpose, and it is completely against nature to live without purpose. So I wouldn't blame young people if they could articulate their anger. I wouldn't blame them if they said, you brought me into this world, you give me a life, you cannot tell me what it's for, and I can't stand existing for no reason. It goes against the grain. So unless somebody answers my question, I'll break everything and destroy everything and hurt everybody I can. It really, really would be so easy. These people are begging in their violence. They're telling you that they're desperate. They're either going to kill you or they're going to kill themselves. Because there's this huge hole in their heart. We are purposeful creatures and no one will tell me what my purpose is. That's cruel and unusual punishment.
Rabbi, I think I feel more equipped to have a deep conversation with a friend about fear, anxiety, meaning, and purpose. But let's say we don't have a lot of time to have that conversation. Let's say we're with a friend who is in a moment of extreme anxiety and fear. And as a good friend or partner or whatever the relationship is, you want to help that person in that time, whether it's on a plane with turbulence, driving through a riot and your car gets overtaken, anything. What would you tell, imagine that you are able to stay calm and manage your fear and remove yourself from anxiety, but your friend is not, and we don't have a time for an extensive conversation. What are the few words that you would tell that other person?
I think the first step is empathize. Don't tell them anything. Just share the agony. The worst thing you can do is dismiss it. Say, nah, don't be anxious. Then you are not my friend and you have nothing to offer me. The first thing you have to do is empathize. Share the feeling. Don't try to get rid of it. And don't say, I understand your problem. Don't be condescending. Be in the problem with the person. Then they'll trust what you have to say. But if you simply offer a solution, you come across as being cold and insensitive. I got to tell you, this marriage counseling session that I had, this couple were married many years, never had a problem before, but in the last week or so, something happened and the husband wants a divorce now. Can't stand her. So what happened? Interesting. The man made an investment, financial investment, $30,000 in a venture, and he lost all the entire sum. He was devastated. He was devastated, on the verge of a nervous breakdown. His wife said to him, "It's only money." He hates her for saying that. And she's saying, "What? I was trying to be helpful. I'm telling him it's not a big problem. It's just money." He hates her. She is now the enemy. What did she do wrong? She forgot to empathize first. So he's cracking up. He's having a nervous breakdown. And she says to him, you don't have to. It's just money. That is so hurtful. It's so dismissive. If she had felt his pain, if she had empathized, yes, it's horrible. And then, Then if she would have said, but you know, we'll survive this, it's only money, then she would be the hero. So before you give comfort or try to give comfort to someone who is in the crisis stage of a problem, you make yourself the enemy. So don't console somebody who is in the process of grieving. Let them grieve. Help them grieve. Grieve with them. And then when you've had enough of that, then you can start offering solutions. But we must have empathy. We can't be flippant or cavalier about another person's pain just because you don't share that pain. So we have to be very careful before we offer advice, because advice is accepted only from a close friend. So be a friend, then offer advice. God does that too.
Mannis, you mentioned before, you used the word humility as being a central point in overcoming fear and anxiety. Can you just say a little about what humility is? And more importantly, what are the easy ways to ascertain how humble or not humble a person is? And number three, I know this is a whole shopping list, but what simple practical steps can someone take to become a little bit more humble?
You know, the guy who said, when I was young, I was very arrogant. I was not good. But when I got older and became humble, now I'm perfect. Humility is a tricky thing. You can be so arrogant about your humility. So what really is humility? Let's learn humility from God himself, because God is humble. God is humble. If we look for definitions, which I love to do, humility and vulnerability are very closely related. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Modern psychology has told us that. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a strength. But not because strong people can afford to get hurt without being destroyed, whereas weak people, if they're hurt, they're going to be completely destroyed. No, it's not about hurt. Vulnerability has nothing to do with being hurt. It's purely a strength. Because humility means I'm not enough for me. I am not enough for me. That's vulnerability. Without you, I'm not enough. God created the world. Why? Because there was just him. And he found that unsatisfying. Perfect, infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing, eternal, not enough. Just me, not enough. With you, oh, now it's good. Where does God say this? He said it very loud and clear. And God said, it is not good to be alone. He was talking about himself. It's not good to be alone. Why? Because it's just you. And when it's just you, there's no goodness. There's perfection. But what's good about perfect? What's good about it? I am all capable, all knowing, all powerful. Yeah, and that's me. What's good about that? People get very confused. God is perfect, and yet he creates a world? Why? If I were perfect, I wouldn't create a world. Who needs it? I'm perfect. A lot of confusion. If I were perfect, would I need you? No. That's wrong. When I am perfect, that's when I really need you. Because what's the point of being perfect? So God is vulnerable. That's the first thing we learn about God in the Torah. In the beginning, when there was just him, God created the world. That's vulnerable. You're not enough. You're not content just being you. Wow. That's humble. Without me, you're not perfect, and with me, you are? Wow. How humble is that? So I had this little story, incident. A guy calls me from Israel. He has a serious problem because his 12-year-old daughter got it into her head that God is angry at her. And she's miserable. And everything they tried to convince her that God was not angry at her failed. She's miserable. And he puts her on the phone. He says, here, talk to her. So on the spur of the moment, I said to her, God is angry at you? She says, yes. I said, I'm so jealous. She says, what? I said, I'm jealous. You're 12 years old and you can get God angry? How did you become so important? When God says he's angry at us, inwardly we are laughing. We're thrilled. God is angry at me? How did I become so significant? If God is angry at me, it means that what I do matters, that he's watching, he's observing, he notices, he cares, it makes a difference to him. It makes a difference to him what I do. Makes me feel really important and makes God sound really humble. Why would I make any difference to him? Good, bad, ugly. Why would that make any difference to him? So you see, if we were going to teach morality, this would be the first message. God needs you. God depends on you. God is hoping every day that you join him in making the world perfect. It's not just about you. So God's humility is God's vulnerability. Real humility means, by myself, not good. Even though I'm perfectly capable, self-sufficient. So I don't need you to cook for me. I don't need you to park the car for me. I don't need you to support me financially. I'm just not good without you, without someone. That is the beginning or the basis of all humility and all vulnerability. And we have to teach our children Vulnerable is not a weakness.
We're coming close to the end of the evening, the end of the conversation. If I can invite Lea and Julien to ask some closing questions or comments on anything that's been discussed or not been discussed.
Sure. So, I mean, so thanks a lot, first of all. From my side, I think the question that Julien asked earlier in your response around empathizing, and in a way, it's linking to what you just said. It's a way to say that being vulnerable is okay to a friend. It's a way to empathize with that and to bringing it to something that we should all feel comfortable being. So I'm really taking that as a piece of advice. I think it's a very strong one, and one that we tend to forget about, and I think one that we can apply to ourselves as well. Sort of recognizing our own fears, our own anxiety, and then being in solution mode. Because I do believe there is a sense of optimism, a sense of getting out of the crisis. So that's what I'm taking away.
Myself, I'm taking away, I think, the point about humility, and I think we, of course, through my learning, come across the topic and how important it is several times, and it just seems like the solution to most things. And thank you, Rabbi, for bringing another use case, call it that, where humility is so powerful, because I think it says so much about not just the person, but actually helps solve a lot of issues, a lot of problems, and the purpose of this talk, fear and anxiety. And when you have humility, you really put yourself in a position to forego a lot of the illusions of control and power that are so often the original seed of anxiety in particular. So another good reason to be humble and exhibit humility is a way of counteracting anxiety and some of the ills that come along with it. So thank you.
Telling children you can be whatever you want to be, that is such a destructive message. Really? It's all up to me? Then why isn't it going my way? It's a terrible message. Let me end with this. This guy says, he writes an article, he says, when I was young, I was determined to be the best at everything. I got a little older and I realized that was not going to happen. So then I decided that I want to be the best at one thing. I got a little older and I realized that was not going to happen. So I decided that I should try to be good at something. But now that I'm really old, if my wife would write on my tombstone, he was okay, I'll settle for that. Really, telling people it's all up to you, you can be whatever you want, you can become whatever you want. What fake news is that? And how much anxiety does that produce? Any failure is because you didn't try, because you didn't do it right. Because if you did it right, you would succeed at everything. It's a foolish, childish Peter Pan fantasy, and it does produce a lot of anxiety. The Jewish message is, don't be the best. Don't even be good. Just do what you were created to do. You don't have to be good at it. Be what you're meant to be. And that depends on your talents, your resources, your gifts, or your handicaps. Just be what you're supposed to be. There's no anxiety there. But there's a challenge, which is exciting. So a Jew should just be a Jew. Should he be a good Jew? Don't start with that. A mother should be a mother. Oh, she should be a good mother. No, don't do that. And a husband should be a good husband. Just be a husband. Once you decide to be a good husband, your wife is going to suffer from your goodness. Just be a husband, like today. It's not a project. It's what you're there for. That's no anxiety, but a lot of goodness. So this couple, I spoke to the guy yesterday, and I had given them some marriage counseling months ago. Hadn't heard from them. He calls me up yesterday, and he says, I just want to let you know that things are better. I said, what's better? He says, everything. It is better. I said, what made it better? He says, I don't know. We're just nicer to each other. And you don't know what did it? Yeah, the reason things are better is because you're nicer to each other. How did you miss that the first time around? Just be nicer. Be a husband. Be your parent's child. Be your child's parent. Don't be good at it. Just be it. And don't be a good Jew. That's where all our problems start. Just be a Jew. As Jewish as you are. Yes.
On that note, I'd like to take this opportunity again to thank you all. Rabbi Friedman from New York, Lea, Julien, for really giving your time and this very candid conversation. Lots to process, and lots to internalize, fascinating insights and ideas, keywords, humility, vulnerability, and also purpose. A lot to take away. And again, thank you very much, our viewers around the world. Again, connecting London with Israel and New York. We hope you are inspired. We hope there's lots of insights here that will help you overcome those fears and anxieties and to live a life of greater meaning and purpose. Thank you very much again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you very much to our panelists in the conversation. Our next event of real talk, real people, real conversation will take place on our Facebook Live page with Rabbi Manis Friedman and with other members of the Young Advisory from the Center for Jewish Life. We wish you on June 22nd. We wish you a wonderful evening, and thank you very much for joining.